When two security personnel attempted to remove a black Marine from his son's graduation, an unexpected sight unfolded. 6 Navy SEALs emerged from the audience, bringing the entire venue to a hush without uttering a single word. Solomon Drayton hadn't anticipated any recognition as his vehicle pulled into the parking area behind Elmridge High. The edifice resembled typical small-town Texas high schools, aged red brick, a few flags fluttering above the entrance, and teenagers congregating near the gymnasium doors. It was already bustling. Parents in formal attire, siblings clutching signs, and a grandmother leaning on a walker. Everything was as expected. He parked his Dodge Charger near the chain-link fence and exited, smoothing the creases of his deep blue Marine uniform. His boots gleamed with a mirror-like polish, not from a desire to impress, but because he approached tasks with unwavering thoroughness. He surveyed his surroundings. His posture was notably erect and resolute. His expression, though calm, held the quiet intensity of someone who had witnessed life from countless perspectives. He had journeyed 8 hours from Temple to attend his son's high school graduation. He could have flown, but the Charger was his wife's cherished car, and even 2 years after her passing he still felt a profound connection to her on the road. Solomon opened the car door and retrieved a small, aged photograph from the glove compartment, its corner slightly torn. It depicted his wife cradling Tyron as an infant. He gently slipped it into the inner pocket of his jacket. "I promised you," he murmured softly, "I wouldn't miss it." His walk to the entrance was deliberate and unhurried, each stride imbued with significance. His chest swelled with an emotion he couldn't name, a blend of immense pride and deep sorrow. Inside, the gymnasium was packed, its metal chairs occupying the floor, the bleachers already overflowing. The air carried faint scents of concession popcorn and floor wax. It was loud, bustling, and vibrant. Solomon presented his printed ticket to a volunteer near the door, a compact man with a clipboard and headset. The man squinted, nodded swiftly, and gestured toward the third row on the left. "You're all set, family seating up front." "Appreciate it," Solomon responded, his voice steady. He navigated his way to the designated row, catching glimpses of other families as he passed. Some individuals observed him, did a double take at the uniform, then averted their gaze as if they hadn't. One woman offered a faint smile, then whispered something to the man beside her. Solomon remained impassive. He had long been accustomed to being a tall black man in uniform, understanding the nuances of various gazes. He located his seat and settled down. The plastic chair was slightly unstable. He adjusted it without complaint. Before him, the stage was arranged, banners declaring Class of 2024, in large silver letters stretched across the gym wall. A few school board members stood near the podium reviewing notes. Solomon's gaze drifted to the rows of students lined up at the far end of the gym. Tyron was somewhere in the middle, tall, slender, with his mother's eyes. 18 years just like that. He recalled holding him the night he was born, still in uniform, dirt still beneath his fingernails. He'd flown in from Okinawa with only 4 days leave, and now here they were. He remained motionless, scarcely blinking, absorbing the moment. Behind him, people continued to trickle in. Chairs scraped, programs rustled, someone laughed too loudly, a man spilled his coffee and muttered under his breath. None of it penetrated Solomon's awareness. His world had narrowed to the stage, the rows of youthful faces, and the comforting weight of the photo against his chest. Then the music began, pomp and circumstance, and the surrounding crowd rose to its feet. A few students appeared nervous, others beamed. Solomon also stood, shoulders squared, arms at his sides. The national anthem followed. Everyone placed hands over hearts. Solomon remained unmoving. He didn't need to. His entire presence was a salute. He thought of his wife again, how she would have wept through the entire ceremony, how she would have adjusted Tyron's tie 3 times before allowing him to leave the house. His gaze remained fixed forward, but as the final note of the anthem faded, 2 uniformed men began walking down the side aisle, heading directly for him. The 2 security officers moved with purpose. They weren't police. Their badges identified them as Harlan Security Services, and their uniforms consisted of standard black polo shirts tucked into cargo pants, earpieces and radios clipped to their belts. Neither appeared older than 30. One was short and broad-shouldered with a shaved head and a stern expression. The other was taller, lanky, and chewing gum as if he had a more appealing destination. Solomon noticed them immediately but didn't flinch. His training had long ago taught him that stillness often conveyed more authority than movement. He kept his eyes forward, his hands resting casually on his thighs. The shorter guard stopped beside him and leaned down just enough to be heard. "Excuse me, sir," he said in a low voice. "We're going to need you to come with us." Solomon slowly turned his head. "Is there a problem?" The tall one stepped forward. "Yeah, this section's for families of graduating seniors." Solomon blinked, then reached into his coat pocket and produced the same printed ticket he'd displayed at the door. "This is my seat. Third row left side. Family seating confirmed." The shorter guard didn't even glance at the ticket. "We were told it's full." Solomon didn't move. "It was full when I sat down too. You want to tell me who gave that order?" The tall guard shifted uneasily. He hadn't anticipated such a calm, clear voice. "Look, it's not a big deal. There are some extra seats in the back. Let's not make this anything it doesn't have to be." Solomon's eyes narrowed slightly, not with anger but with quiet assessment. "I drove 8 hours to watch my son walk across that stage. I'll be sitting right here." A few heads had begun to turn. A woman 2 rows over nudged her husband and gestured toward them. Someone in the bleachers subtly tilted their phone, perhaps recording. The short guard straightened up and surveyed the room. "Sir, I'm going to ask one more time." "You can ask all day," Solomon said, his voice lower now, firmer. "I'm not moving." The tall one sucked his teeth. "Maybe you'd be more comfortable in the back, that's all we're saying." And there was. Solomon looked at him fully now. That phrase wasn't about logistics. It wasn't about policy. It was about something older, something subtler, something that had trailed him throughout his life. In boardrooms, waiting rooms, front porches, and even the base cafeteria, just behind a smile, just beneath a whisper. He didn't respond. The atmosphere around them shifted, as it does when people begin to perceive a boundary has been crossed. The short guard noticed it too. He adjusted the radio on his hip and mumbled something into the mic, never breaking eye contact. Solomon remained seated, staring forward as if the conversation had concluded, because for him it had. An older, pale-skinned woman seated beside him leaned in slightly and whispered, "Don't you let them move you." He nodded once, acknowledging her but saying nothing. He didn't want to create a scene. He simply wanted to witness his son's graduation like any other father. But the guards weren't finished. The tall one lowered his voice again. "Look, you have a problem, take it up with the school office. We have our orders." Solomon turned his head toward him once more. "You have a name, son?" The guard blinked. "It's Officer Malley." "Not officer," Solomon corrected. "You're private security." The other one interjected, "All right, that's enough. If you don't stand up." He didn't complete the sentence because at that moment the gym door at the far end clicked open and 6 men entered. No uniforms, no badges, just resolute postures, squared shoulders, and faces that conveyed they had endured far worse than awkward stares and misinterpreted directives. They didn't enter as a group. They dispersed one by one, occupying different positions as if they weren't together. Yet anyone observing closely could discern their synchronized movements, their shared vigilance, their uniform stillness and alertness. Solomon didn't look back, he didn't need to. He knew precisely who they were. But the guards didn't, at least not yet, and they were about to discover. Solomon kept his focus on the stage. His jaw remained still but his mind was active. He wasn't angry, not yet, but something within him engaged, like a switch he rarely used unless absolutely necessary. One built for survival, for equilibrium, for composure under duress. The 2 guards didn't depart, they lingered. It was the kind of lingering that wasn't about performing a duty. It was about attempting to assert authority. But what they failed to grasp was that Solomon had existed in environments where power dictated life or death, not in a gymnasium with folding chairs and a sound system. A student's name was called from the stage and the crowd offered polite applause, but those nearby were no longer genuinely attentive to the ceremony. They were observing the standoff, pretending not to. The taller guard, Malley, shifted his stance again. He leaned closer, his voice quieter this time. "I'm trying to do you a favor here, all right? This doesn't need to get ugly." Solomon's eyes flicked to him. "You don't have that kind of favor to offer." Pause. Malley recoiled slightly as if re-evaluating his next move. But the shorter one, Garvin, according to his badge, was less subtle. He disliked being challenged. His hand hovered near the radio again. A few rows behind, a man slowly stood up. No one noticed at first. He said nothing, simply crossed his arms and stared, clean-shaven, broad-framed, eyes sharp. He took a seat near the aisle without averting his gaze from the scene unfolding before him. A second man rose on the opposite side of the gym with the same posture, calm and intentional. Then a third. They didn't speak, they didn't need to. Solomon knew them all. He didn't turn to look because his instincts didn't require confirmation. He had led these men through mud, gunfire, and silences darker than most people could fathom. Garvin leaned down again, this time with a new tone in his voice. Listen, man, you're making this into a situation. Solomon turned his head slowly and deliberately. And you're not listening. Garvin's hand twitched toward the radio again, but before he could utter a word, a voice cut through the tension from 10 feet away. Is there a reason this man's being bothered? It was clear, calm, controlled. The kind of voice that doesn't rise to demand attention. It drops just enough to make everyone else fall silent. It belonged to a man standing in the center aisle, tall, with a salt and pepper beard, wearing a fitted black coat over a gray shirt. His name was Creed Marston. He was the one Solomon had rescued from the wreckage in Kandahar, dragging him across 200 yards of sand while bullets rained down like gravel. Garvin looked up, caught off guard. Who are you? Creed didn't answer. He stepped forward. I asked you a question. Mally raised a hand. Sir, we've got this under control. No, Creed said, sharper now. You don't. Another man stood up from the far bleachers, then another. 4 of them now. Solomon remained seated, still and quiet. The entire left side of the gym was now openly watching. A boy pointed. A teacher attempted to redirect attention back to the stage, but no one was looking at the diplomas anymore. Creed took one more step forward. You're embarrassing yourselves and you're one breath away from making this worse. Garvin glanced at Mally, who looked less confident by the second. It was clear now they hadn't anticipated backup, especially not backup like this. I don't care what your orders were, Creed said. You don't put your hands on that man. You don't tell him to move. You don't ask again. The silence in the gym felt heavy, the kind that stemmed not from fear but from deference. A quiet respect that began to intensify as more people grasped what was transpiring. Solomon finally looked up at Creed and offered the slightest nod. Not a thank you, not a request, just recognition. Creed's eyes softened for a moment, then he stepped back and resumed his seat, arms folded. But the tension hadn't dissipated from the air, not yet, and the onlookers were waiting to see what the guards would do next. The gymnasium faded. The stage, the banners, the faces, all blurred into the background of Solomon's mind. His eyes remained open, but his memory transported him back 15 years to Afghanistan. It was late afternoon in Kandahar province. The sun didn't set gently there. It descended like a hammer, transforming the sand into rust and the air into steel. Solomon, a gunnery sergeant then, had just concluded briefing his unit when everything spiraled. A roadside AD detonated beneath their convoy, flipping the lead Humvee like a toy. Dirt and metal rained down before anyone could scream. Then came the gunfire, not scattered but coordinated. Solomon didn't think. He ducked behind what remained of a door frame, surveying the chaos. Smoke obscured the edge of the valley, but he observed 6 men down, trapped behind the burning wreckage of a second vehicle. Most were pinned. One was already attempting to crawl forward, dragging another by the vest. That was Creed Marston, with only 3 months in country and a bullet through his thigh. Solomon bolted, without hesitation, without a radio call. He ran through open ground, evading bursts of gunfire, sliding into cover behind a blown axle. Creed looked up, blood on his temple, gasping. You're bleeding, Solomon had said. You noticed. Creed coughed. Solomon seized the straps of the downed soldier beside him, Enrique Soto, and began pulling. Creed pushed from behind, wincing with every inch. Where's Divas? Solomon shouted. Creed pointed weakly, left side under the hood. That's when Solomon saw him. A young SEAL pinned under a section of the engine block, his leg trapped. He was crying for help but too incapacitated to move. Without pausing, Solomon instructed Creed, "You keep low and move when I move." Creed nodded. That's when he truly began to comprehend the essence of leadership. Solomon sprinted across again, His foot struck gravel then bone, but he didn't stop. He slid to Diva's, crouched low and gripped the edge of the mangled hood with both hands. It wouldn't budge. "Gunny, don't." Diva shouted. I'm good. You're not staying here." Solomon braced, one foot dug deep and lifted. His shoulders strained, his ribs ached, the metal groaned, but it rose just enough for Diva's to yank his leg free. They fell back together, crawling toward the ridgeline. Gunfire cracked overhead. Creed returned with Soto limping on his good leg. Two others followed, Lim and Horton, their faces blackened with ash, rifles at the ready. When the firing ceased, there were no cheers, no victory speeches, just silence and breathing. All 6 of them were alive. Solomon was the last to depart. He maintained rear watch until the dust settled and the medevac arrived. He didn't speak for a long time afterward, but Creed remembered. They all did. After that day there was never a doubt. If Solomon requested anything, anywhere, anytime, they would be there no matter what. Back in the gym, Creed sat quietly in his chair, eyes fixed on the guards still standing near Solomon. He wasn't contemplating war. He was contemplating promises. The man who had extracted him from a war zone was now being subjected to harassment in front of a high school stage for attempting to witness his son's graduation. He clenched his fists. Another SEAL, Javier Meeks, entered and sat 4 rows back. Then Zachary Wells found a spot along the right side bleachers. They didn't speak, they didn't need to. Solomon glanced toward the back of the gym now, just briefly. His eyes met Meeks's. That was sufficient. But the guards didn't comprehend the meaning of those gazes, not yet, and the instant they made their next move, they would learn very quickly. The ceremony continued, at least superficially. Names were still being announced, families clapped, some too loudly, attempting to mask the tension that now permeated the air. But the focus had shifted. Eyes that had once been fixed on the stage now repeatedly drifted toward the 3rd row on the left, where Solomon Drayton sat like a statue and 2 guards stood, seemingly at a loss. Garvin glanced toward the front where a school official attempted to get his attention. The woman looked anxious, mouthing something and subtly gesturing toward the guards, but Garvin shook his head. He wasn't prepared to retreat. He had initiated something and his ego wouldn't allow him to back down. Mally shifted his weight again, his jaw working harder now on the gum, clearly uneasy, but he hadn't left either. "Sir," Garvin said again, this time louder, "this is your last warning." Solomon didn't move. To do what, exactly? Garvin stepped forward, leaning in so close his belt brushed Solomon's knee. "To stop making a scene. We don't want any trouble. Just move to the back." Solomon turned his head and looked him directly in the eye. "You're the only one causing trouble." Garvin's nostrils flared. That's when it slipped. "You think wearing that uniform makes you better than everybody else? This is a high school, man, not your base." A hush fell across the rows around them. A little girl stopped squirming in her seat. A dad with a camera froze mid-zoom. Even Mally took a half step back as if the words had landed with greater impact than he expected. Solomon didn't blink. He took a breath, not to calm himself but to remain centered. "You need to walk away." Garvin didn't. Instead, his hand dropped to the front of his belt, not on a weapon but near enough to feel menacing. And that's when Creed stood up. He didn't yell, he didn't posture. He simply stepped into the aisle, slow and deliberate, as if the conversation had now become his concern. The gym wasn't completely silent but close. Creed's voice was clear. "If you touch him, you'll answer to me." Garvin turned his head. "And who the hell are you?" Creed took another step forward. "The man who's telling you this ends right now." One of the school board members noticed what was happening and whispered something to the principal. An assistant principal rose and began moving toward the back of the gym, likely contacting someone on the walkie-talkie clipped to her side. The school staff was finally realizing this wasn't going to de-escalate quietly. More SEALs rose from their seats, scattered across the room. No formation, no spoken cue, just a unified instinct that activated simultaneously. By now all 6 were standing. Garvin looked around, understanding they weren't just dealing with an angry parent. Something was different. These men didn't fidget. They didn't shift from foot to foot. Their presence filled the space like the pressure before a storm. Creed took a step closer. "You've got 2 choices. Walk away now or watch this go somewhere you don't want it to go." Mally's voice finally cracked through. "Let's just back off, man." But Garvin still hesitated. Solomon spoke again, not to Garvin but to Creed. Don't waste your breath. He already made his decision. Creed didn't smile, he simply lowered his voice one last time. Don't mistake silence for weakness. Finally, Garvin stepped back, not much but enough. His hand dropped away from his belt. His face burned, but he was outnumbered and outmatched. The principal appeared near the aisle, whispering quickly to the guards. Whatever she said was quiet but firm enough to send them both walking toward the back exit. They didn't look at anyone on their way out. Solomon exhaled, slow and steady. Creed sat back down without a word. All 6 seals remained standing, but the moment still lingered in the air, and Tyron Drayton was observing everything from the lineup of students, his hands clenched at his sides. Tyron Drayton was near the center of the graduating class, standing in line between a girl with vibrant braids and a boy whose gown kept slipping off his shoulders. They were attempting to focus on the ceremony, laughing nervously and checking their name cards as if the world were normal. But Tyron's world wasn't. He had seen the 2 guards approaching his father from the moment the anthem concluded. At first he thought perhaps it was just routine, maybe they were assisting someone in finding a seat. But something in his chest told him otherwise. Then he saw the way his dad sat, so still, so composed, yet completely focused. He'd witnessed that look before, the same one he'd caught when he was 12 and came home weeping because someone at school had uttered something they shouldn't have. His dad hadn't raised his voice then either. He had simply sat with that same expression, like unyielding steel. Tyron kept his eyes on the scene as best he could from his position in line. He couldn't hear what was said, but the body language conveyed enough. He saw the guard standing too close, saw his father calmly remaining seated, and then he saw a man stand up, a tall individual in a dark coat, and somehow Tyron knew that wasn't just a parent, that man knew his father. The way he moved, the way he positioned himself between the guard and the row, it was clear he wasn't there for drama. He was there for Solomon Drayton. Then another man stood and another. It wasn't loud, but it was as if the temperature in the room shifted. Everyone was watching now. Tyron's heart beat faster. He wasn't scared, he was something else, torn between pride and defiance. He had grown up hearing fragments of his dad's service stories. Not the grim details, his dad kept most of those to himself, but bits here and there. A buddy who sent Christmas cards every year, a scar that originated somewhere in the dust, a box in the garage marked Kandahar, that no one ever opened. He never knew the names, never saw the faces, but now they were here, standing as if they had been waiting for this moment, as if they had never ceased having his dad's back. Tyron blinked hard, suppressing the burning sensation behind his eyes. He didn't want to cry, not here, not now. The line advanced, a few names were called. The applause slowly resumed as if someone had pressed play again after a pause. But the room wasn't the same anymore. The energy had shifted. It wasn't about balloons or banners now. It was about respect. One of the assistant principals tapped Tyron's shoulder and said something he didn't hear. He simply nodded. The student next to him leaned over and whispered, "Is that your dad?" Tyron didn't say anything, he didn't have to. The entire gymnasium had witnessed it, and now everyone in that building understood what kind of man Solomon Drayton was. In the audience, Creed remained standing. He didn't look around for approval. He wasn't seeking attention. He was watching Solomon, still seated in the same plastic chair, hands resting on his lap, eyes fixed on the stage as if nothing had transpired. But something had. The rest of the seals also remained on their feet, not posturing, just present. Their silence spoke louder than any microphone ever could. A few parents clapped louder now with each name, almost as if they were attempting to compensate for the earlier tension. The gym had transformed into a living entity, awakened by a moment of injustice, held steady by the weight of honor. Solomon remained still, not defiant, not resentful, just present. A father watching his son take another step into adulthood. But the moment that would transcend all of it was still approaching, and when Tyron's name was finally called, the room wouldn't be able to pretend anymore. The line was moving faster now. Some students were still fidgeting, adjusting caps, whispering jokes under their breath, trying to savor the moment. But Tyron wasn't in that space anymore. His mind kept returning to his father sitting alone, surrounded by faces but completely centered in that chair, as if it had been custom-made for him. There was something about the way he carried himself, calm, quiet, unshakable, and something about the way those men, those warriors, rose around him without needing to be asked. Tyron realized for the first time that he didn't truly grasp the full burden his father bore. Sure, he'd seen the pictures, the medals in the old wooden box, the folded flag tucked into the bookshelf in the living room. But those objects never truly communicated, they just sat there like relics. Today they moved, today they stood. The assistant principal called out the next name, then another. Tyron was 3 people away from the stage. He wiped his palms on his gown, tried to regulate his breathing. The girl in front of him turned and grinned nervously. Ready? Tyron offered a small smile. More than you know. He stepped forward. On the other side of the gym, Solomon leaned slightly forward, his eyes never leaving the stage. He didn't applaud for every student, not out of disrespect, but because his focus had narrowed to the boy in the black robe with the red and white honor cords, the boy who so strikingly resembled his mother when he smiled. 1 name, 2 names, then the announcer paused for a second, cleared her throat and spoke with a bit more gravity than before. Tyron Drayton. The name echoed. There was a beat of silence, half a second perhaps less, before the room erupted in applause, whistling and cheering. But what stood out wasn't the volume, it was the rhythm of it. The sound wasn't chaotic, it was deliberate, coordinated, profound. The 6 seals, still standing, raised their hands and applauded in perfect unison. Each clapped with force, not for show. A salute without the formal gesture, a statement that said, "We see you. We see your father. We honor both." Tyron walked across the stage slowly, chin held high, steps steady. His heart pounded, but it wasn't nerves. It was pride, and not just pride in himself. It was the pride of knowing precisely who his father was and what it meant to bear that last name. He accepted his diploma from the principal, shook her hand and turned toward the audience. His eyes scanned for one person, then found him. Solomon didn't wave, didn't stand. He simply met his son's gaze and offered the smallest, most meaningful smile of the day. Tyron nodded once and stepped off the stage. The applause still hadn't subsided. Parents who hadn't uttered a word all ceremony were now clapping vigorously. Some stood, a few wiped their eyes, unsure exactly why, but feeling as though they had just witnessed something significant. Solomon sat back in his chair and allowed the moment to envelop him. He wasn't the kind of man to weep in public, but inside something unburdened. Not grief, not pain, just a release. The kind that only comes when a cycle feels complete, even if it never truly is. The other names continued, but something had shifted. From that moment on, every student who walked the stage did so in the echo of what had just happened. Not because it was theatrical, not because it was viral, but because it was real. But the story didn't conclude with the applause, and when father and son met again outside the gym, it would be more than just a proud embrace. It would be the transmission of something deeper. The final name was called 20 minutes later. Everyone stood as the graduating class hurled their caps, screamed with relief, and embraced as if they hadn't seen each other in years. Phones rose, cameras clicked, and balloons bobbed above the crowd as the students began filing out through the gym's double doors toward the back lot. Solomon didn't move immediately. He sat quietly as the noise swelled around him, absorbing it all. The music, the laughter, the flash of silver and red gowns sweeping by. His eyes followed Tyron as he vanished into the hallway with his classmates. A teacher gave him a high five, another pulled him in for a side hug. But even amidst the chaos, Tyron turned once, just once, and looked back. Solomon caught it. A brief glance, but it contained everything. "Did you see me?" And Solomon's expression provided the answer. Every second. The crowd began to thin. People shuffled out with flowers and balloons, congratulating each other in boisterous bursts. Solomon stood slowly, stretching his legs, feeling the stiffness of sitting in one position for too long. Creed approached as the gym emptied. He said nothing at first, just looked at Solomon, then toward the exit. "You okay?" Creed finally asked. Solomon nodded. "I've been through worse." Creed smiled slightly. "Yeah, but it still shouldn't have happened." "No," Solomon said. "It shouldn't have." Another SEAL, Javier Meeks, joined them. "We tried to stay low-key, but once that guy put his hand near his belt." Solomon raised a hand gently. "You all did what needed to be done. That was enough." The 3 men stood there for a few more seconds, allowing the noise to drain from the room. Then Solomon said, "I want to see my boy." Outside, the sun was intense against the concrete, casting long shadows from the bleachers onto the back lot. Students were dispersed in small groups, posing for photos, tossing their caps again, calling out to relatives. Tyron stood near the flagpole, his gown half unzipped, the diploma folder in one hand and his phone in the other. When he saw his father approach, he stopped mid-conversation. The crowd around him faded into the background. They met halfway. Tyron was the first to speak. "You okay?" Solomon nodded. "You?" "Yeah," Tyron said, then looked down for a second. "They tried to move you." "I know." Tyron's jaw flexed. "I was ready to walk off that stage, Dad. I swear I was 2 seconds from saying something." Solomon placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "And that's why you didn't." Tyron looked up. "What do you mean?" "Because you knew I could handle it. And because you handled your moment like a man. You didn't let anybody take it from you." Tyron held his breath for a second. "Who were those guys that stood up?" Solomon glanced behind him. The 6 SEALs were now outside too, gathered near the exit, talking quietly. They weren't seeking attention, just keeping an eye out as always. "They're men I bled with," Solomon said. "Men who know what loyalty means. Men who don't forget." Tyron nodded slowly. "That was powerful." "It was necessary," Solomon replied. "Sometimes silence is louder than shouting, and sometimes standing up without speaking says more than 1,000 words." For a moment neither of them said anything. Then Tyron smiled. "You gonna tell me those war stories now?" Solomon chuckled. "Some of them. You're old enough for the real parts now." They stood there shoulder to shoulder, not just father and son. 2 men connected by something that couldn't be explained, only experienced. Across the lot, Creed raised a hand, not a wave, just a gesture of respect. Tyron returned it without hesitation. The sun continued its ascent, but for the Drayton men time moved differently now. But one more moment remained, because after all that, the true lesson hadn't yet been articulated. Most of the crowd had dispersed by the time Solomon and Tyron walked back to the parking lot. A few families still lingered, laughing around folding chairs or loading up trunks with floral arrangements and graduation gifts. But the buzz had quieted, and the sun had softened into early evening light. Solomon unlocked the Charger, the same one his wife used to drive to parent-teacher meetings and weekend road trips. Tyron paused at the passenger door, running his fingers along a scratch near the handle. "She would have been screaming the loudest today," he said softly. "She would have made you retake every photo until your smile looked just right," Solomon replied, managing a grin. They climbed in, shutting the doors behind them. The car was warm from the sun, but it felt like a cocoon, sealed off from the rest of the world for a few breaths. Tyron turned to face his father. "I have to ask, why didn't you say anything to those guards? You just sat there." Solomon tapped the steering wheel once, then turned to him. "Because I don't have to stand up for who I am, and I don't need to raise my voice to be heard." Tyron looked out the window for a second, pondering that. "You know how many times in my life I've had to choose between letting something slide or making a big deal out of it?" Solomon continued. "That moment today, what those men tried to do, it wasn't new. But how we respond, that's what defines us." "But they disrespected you," Tyron said, "in front of everybody." "Yes," Solomon said. "And everyone saw it. But they also saw the truth. They saw 6 men who had every reason to be somewhere else stand up, not because I asked, but because they knew what that moment meant." Tyron absorbed that. "Son," Solomon said, "life will present you with 100 opportunities to react with anger, and sometimes anger is justified. But most times silence cuts deeper. Dignity endures longer. That's what people remember." He reached into his jacket and pulled out the folded photo, the one of Tyron as a baby, his late wife cradling him. "I carried this with me through Kandahar. I carried it through losing your mom. And I carried it here today. Not because it gives me strength, but because it reminds me of what's worth protecting." Tyron's voice dropped. "You always knew who had your back." Solomon smiled. "I didn't need to know. I just had faith. Real men don't disappear when things get uncomfortable. They show up and they stand." There was a pause before Tyron spoke again. "I want to be like that. Like you." "You already are," Solomon said. "You walked that stage with pride. You didn't let anger steal your moment. You stayed grounded even when everything around you was trying to throw you off balance." Outside the car, the last of the SEALs were getting into their vehicles. Creed gave one final look toward the Charger before driving off. Solomon nodded once. No words, just the quiet acknowledgement of something permanent. Tyron leaned back in the seat. So what now? Solomon turned the key in the ignition. The engine rumbled to life. Now we drive home. You get to choose dinner. Tyron grinned. Waffle House. Solomon chuckled. Of course. As they pulled out of the lot, the school faded behind them, but the memory of what happened inside that gym wouldn't fade anytime soon for anyone who was there. And for Tyron, that day would mark something far greater than a diploma. It was the day he realized manhood had nothing to do with noise, and everything to do with how you carry yourself when the world stops watching. Some people shout to be seen. Others just sit in silence and are never forgotten.